3 years after Hurricane Ian destroyed the Naples Pier, the city is finally getting FEMA disaster funds to replace it. But now there are concerns over how the city got those delayed federal dollars. An investigation by news outlet ProPublica showed how Mayor Teresa Heitmann reached out to Dr. Sinan Gursoy, a political donor of Homeland Security Secretary Kirsti Noem, because other efforts had stalled. Secretary Noem oversees FEMA. According to that reporting, in August, days after that donor reached out to Noem, the secretary reportedly expedited millions of dollars for the pier's reconstruction. In a statement to WGCU, Department of Homeland Security spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin said the allocation of FEMA funds was not politically motivated and, quote, criticizing the secretary's visit to the pier is bizarre as she works to fix this issue for more than 1 million visitors that used to visit the pier in the Naples community. We are joined by the lead reporter on this ProPublica story, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Joshua Kaplan. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Kaplan.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you've covered government for years now. How common is it for political donors to get involved in matters like this? Donors essentially asking politicians to support specific projects.
I mean, so obviously the influence of donors on the federal government as a whole, or certainly making asks of the White House, for instance, is sadly a common fact of, fortunately or unfortunately, a common fact of government these days. You see this all the time with the Trump administration, but you also saw it under Biden, under Obama, Bush. But I don't think that means that this is something one should be cynical about. I mean, more specifically with FEMA and with disaster relief, what happened here is quite unusual and is not something that has been documented like this. We talked to disaster relief experts, and it's political influence in disaster relief isn't, this isn't the first time that's been a factor in terms of, there have been studies that have found that swing states are more likely to get relief, for instance. But, the experts we talked to, as one put it, he'd never heard of anything this egregious in terms of, in this system that really, by all, ought to be something where FEMA is determining how it performs its mission based on the need of people who have been affected by disasters. He had never heard of something like a donor calling and making an ask and then just getting that.
So your reporting used texts and emails to show that Naples Mayor Teresa Heitmann turned to Dr. Gursoy for help after the city was unable to get the disaster funds released, I guess, for more than 6 months, correct?
Yes.
Then your reporting says that after Dr. Gursoy reached out to Secretary Noem, those FEMA funds were released less than 2 weeks later. Why do you think people should care about this story?
Well, first, I think it's important to have a little bit of context here. There's been a lot of criticism of Kirsti Noem this year, including really very pointedly recently from one of Trump's Republican allies in the Senate, that Noem has made FEMA far too slow to respond after natural disasters. And so, we saw this after the deadly floods in Texas over the summer, again in North Carolina, which is still recovering from Hurricane Helene. At this time where there are serious bipartisan questions about just how well FEMA is delivering on its incredibly important mission, life-saving mission. What happened, Noem's actions in Naples point to a level of political favoritism. And I think that's something a lot of people we spoke to found alarming. It's also important to note here that Noem has really consolidated her power over all of the money going out of FEMA. Mm-hmm. There's a policy she put in place where any expense over $100,000 needs her personal sign-off, right, which is a lot of money for you and me, but in the context of disaster relief is incredibly small. And there'd already been a lot of concerns about that creating delays from a logistical perspective, but I think something that really hasn't been talked about as much is that through these sort of policies, Noem has also given herself an unusual degree of power. And I think what happened here heightens concerns about how that power will be used.
Have we seen such power consolidated in that way where, a secretary needs to sign off on everything above 100 grand?
As far as I know, I mean, no, it's incredibly unusual for a cabinet secretary to have that level of involvement. And Noem has said that it's saving money. It's that she is. I don't think she's given the specifics to the evidence of exactly how this happened, but she said she saved billions of dollars through this. But there've been, I mean, just from a logistical perspective, I mean, as Republican Senator Ted Budd from said earlier this month, everything Helene related is $100,000. So, I mean, there have been reports that this has led to search and rescue teams after deadly floods hit being delayed for days because no one hasn't signed off. That it's led to calls going unreturned after disasters because she hasn't signed off on the call center contracts. There's a lot of, I mean, I think she's created an enormous amount of work for herself, and it's certainly, there's been widespread criticism that it's created a significant bottleneck at the agency.
So, Mr. Kaplan, in Naples, certainly the community is getting a pier that, is really popular, that they loved, rebuilt after 3 years of waiting. How do we know that this community wasn't simply the next in line to receive this disaster aid, that it wasn't simply their turn to get those dollars released?
So, I mean, we have all these documents, these texts, these emails that really lay out the timeline in granular detail. And um, Naples officials had been struggling for months, as you said, to try to get this assistance out of FEMA. They tried going through Senator Rick Scott. They had kind of expensive DC lobbyists or consultants on their payroll, and they were feeling really desperate. I mean, they were feeling like things were, the mayor herself was writing to FEMA saying that she's perplexed by the delays, and as she put it herself, she was feeling increasingly helpless before she had the idea of going through one of Noem's donors, and when this donor texts Noem, within 24 hours, he comes back to the mayor with exciting news. He, says, expect a call from Noem's FEMA fixer soon. And then within 2 weeks, everything has changed. Naples officials are celebrating how well things are going. As one city official put it, that FEMA was now moving at warp speed. There's also documentation from FEMA of, it says things like inside FEMA, where FEMA officials are writing things like per leadership instruction, pushing project immediately. So you can see the cause and effect here. This was certainly, I'm not, if there is wrongdoing here, it is not that Naples is getting a pier, but just how this process was, how campaign donors really distorted this process, which I think is laid out very clearly in all of the documents.
If I can end with this, in your reporting, the Department of Homeland Security said this funding had nothing to do with politics. You reported that after Secretary Noem visited the pier, she had dinner with the donor, Dr. Gersoy. What has been the reaction to this story?
I mean, we've heard from a lot of readers, particularly, honestly, readers that are in other disaster zones in the country, North Carolina, Texas, New Mexico, who are just upset. I mean, and of course, I mean, there are a lot of communities right now that feel like they're not winning with FEMA, and that things, that an already flawed agency has gotten much, much slower. And the fact that I think it's been getting a lot of attention and provoked a lot of thought that after a donor contacted Noem about this tourist attraction. The tourist attraction was suddenly on the fast track.
Joshua Kaplan, we thank you so much for your time, and we thank you for your reporting. Thank you.
Thanks again for having me.
We reached out to Mayor Heitmann's office, who responded in part that FEMA has not yet obligated funds and they anticipate receiving the final permit soon. They also added that it's unfortunate how the secretary visits was portrayed when they, quote, represent meaningful engagement and support for our recovery. For the full response from Mayor Heitmann's office, you can visit WGCU.org. Thanks for watching. We've got more great content for you, from news to the arts to the environment. So be sure to like and subscribe to WGCU's YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms for the stories that matter to you.